Hannah. So welcome everyone who's able to join us this morning, and I'm not sure if we've started recording yet. Don't want to say welcome to anyone who's watching this after sort of in your own time, but both thank you so much for coming over. So yeah, as Hannah suggested, my name is Rosie Collins. I'm joining you from an organisation called Grey Matters, and World Skills UK and Grey Matters have partnered up together to produce what we're calling the Mindset Programme. And in essence, what we're trying to do is take all of the information and the science and the research that we've got within a sport and performance capacity and apply this into your disciplines. So obviously, I'm aware we've got some fantastic competitors with us today. So we're going to have quite a serious session in some ways, because we've got a lot of knowledge to get over to you, but I'm really hoping that you'll be able to take some of this information away and start applying it as you move towards your competitions and things that we're looking at this season. So in terms of the plan for today, what we're going to do is explore some of the underpinning science for the PCDE. So that's what Hannah mentioned, the psychological characteristics of developing excellence. Don't worry, don't need to remember that now, and I'll give you a little bit more information about what they are and how they work throughout the presentation. Then what we'll do is pick those apart a little bit and see what they might look like within your discipline, so you can start to understand that in a little bit more detail before actually trying to understand how you might be able to deploy that across your season. But before I start, what I'll probably do is be looking to get a little bit of stuff from you guys either on the chat or just talking with me if you're able. So what would be great is, first of all, just give me your reaction buttons. Give me a thumbs up. Are they there? Are you alive? Are you awake? Are you well? Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. They should be on the bottom. Yes, Lewis, Hendo, Abby, Joel, Brendan, Simona, we're all here. Oh, Hendo, lovely. Now, what we're actually going to look at today as well is, like I said, a bit of stuff on the chat. So it'd be amazing for me if I can have an idea of sort of where you're joining us from and what your discipline is. You know, what do you represent World Skills UK in? So using the chat, just let me know where you're joining us from today, whether it's, you know, your college or, you know, just somewhere in the country, and what your discipline is. So I've got an idea of who I'm talking to. And hopefully, if you're watching this back, you're represented by someone in the session. So let me know where you come from and what you do. I always think I sound a little bit like Cilla Black from Blind Date when I ask that question, but I'm not sure you'll know what I'm talking about. So I can see typing. Here we go. Fantastic. Well done, Abby. Right, welcome. Francis is performance coach, joining from, got someone from Northern Ireland. Wow. Okay, hello, welcome, Francis. Romsey, CNC Milling. So we've got a couple of you with CNC Milling. Working at the same time, still be working at the same time. Fair enough. That's a good effort that you're joining us and working in plumbing at the same time. 3D game art, fantastic. Floristry, wow, Hannah, welcome. Simona, restaurant service, brilliant, all the way from Glasgow. We've got all the home nations joining us, which is brilliant. Who else have we got? Another person from Northern Ireland, interior systems, IT network admin, wow. Okay, so quite a spread of skills. So what I'll be doing is I'll be talking, sometimes I'll be using some of the sports references because that's where I'm coming from. I'm a sports psychologist. I work in motorsport, golf, Olympic sports, team sports. So that's where my background is. But what we've actually been able to see and do is how these PCDEs are relevant for you guys in your disciplines. And if I'm the expert up here, then you guys are the experts over here. And that's, you know, how they might apply to your disciplines is going to be absolutely key. Fantastic. So without any further ado, let's crack on. So the big question is always going to be, what makes the difference? So if you were to think about what is going to make the difference for you in your discipline, you know, being as successful as you want to be, and obviously I'm talking more psychological, mental skills type things, what do you think is going to make the difference? Is it, you know, is it an attitude thing? Is it, Is it an approach? Is it a process? What makes the difference? Is it a word that you've heard bandied about quite a lot? Let me know on the chat. What makes the difference between you being maybe here in your discipline and actually being able to tip into that level of great success? Let me know what you think. It's never easy to watch a presentation on your phone and type on it at the same time, I imagine. So I will bear with you. What do you think's made the difference? What was the difference for your role model? What did they have that no one else had? Or what do you think is the difference for you that's made you be successful with the Squad UK team versus maybe people who aren't quite there yet? So absolutely, it's the time and the practice. Abby thinks maybe confidence and the intelligence. Yeah, absolutely. For Lewis, it's about resilience. Just keep on going. Just keep on trying your best. And that's the same for Hannah. Clara, practice and determination. Absolutely. Fantastic. Now, what's really interesting is that in some of the ideas you've got there, some of the things you've got a lot of control over. So a couple of you have mentioned practice. You've mentioned, how much time you invest, something like that. And that's what we would probably call more skills-based stuff. The opportunities where you can actually have a bit of control over them. And then some of these ideas are actually more likely things that you've become as a result of your journey. So I'm seeing lots of these ideas of determination, resilience, confidence, things that we tend to become as a result of our journey, our process, going on these routes. And that pretty much tends to be the case. So we hear these words bandied about a lot in psychology. So we've got this idea of mental toughness. You've probably all heard of mental toughness. Quite an overarching term where basically it's this idea to be able to just continue to push and not be hit by setbacks. Now, I actually really struggle with the idea of mental toughness because I think it, in essence, if you're not being mentally tough, then it's stigmatizing you as mentally weak. Whereas actually, we have a lot of highs and lows in performance, and being able to manage those highs and lows and be able to not just blindly continue, but give ourselves a bit of rest sometime is essential. But mental toughness seems to be something we are at the end. We've got some other ideas that are a bit more attitudinal. So things like grit and growth mindset, which I'm sure you're all really familiar with. We love grit, we love growth mindset. These are really good ideas. Angela Duckworth actually developed grit because she realized that the students, she was a maths teacher, the students who were the most successful were the ones who were not the best at maths, but the ones who displayed this sense of grittiness. And she's gone on and looked at that in, a load of other environments, but grit. But actually these tend to be attitudinal things that aren't necessarily, it seems, maybe you've got it or you haven't. How do we develop more of a growth mindset? Or we seem to get these really peculiar terms that come out of, research and all these other ideas. And, one of these examples is bounce back ability. So we hear bounce back ability. I think it came out of a few of the American researchers. It's a very jazzy name. But again, what is that? Is that something that we possess, or is that something that we become? And the reality is that what we're actually starting to see is that there are loads of psychological factors that can be precursors to performance. And some of those might be experience-based. So they're these outcome ideas. Some of these might be attitudinally based. So they're all about your attitude. But what we're not sure is whether or not we can develop that more. Or we've got this idea of skills. That actually the psychological factors that can differ, be the difference between those performers that get to where they, hope they would versus where their potential could take them, tends to be this idea of skills. And so for us, what we believe is that working with those skills, or as we're calling them, the psychological characteristics of developing excellence, the PCDEs, can be the real difference. And the reason that is the POC principle. So actually, if we start with the process, which is these mechanisms, so your PCDEs, characteristics and skills that you can actually practice and develop exactly the same way that you would practice and develop all of your other competitive skills. Once you've equipped yourselves with these, and we're calling that the process, we like to think of those as a hand of cards, that whenever you find yourself in a situation that you're not familiar with, or a situation that you know is a difficult opportunity, then you can deploy those particular cards, you can deploy your PCDs as you need. That then feeds into this idea of, you know, an outcome, and that could be your grittiness, that could be your resilience, that could be, you know, insert, we call them the sexy words, insert that word here, whatever the word is that you become after that journey. And as a result of your resilience, chances are you will then be able to go on and achieve your performance. And that performance might be being successful, you know, right now in a qualifying event, or you know, achieving a personal best or a great score, or whatever is suitable in your discipline. But it might also, performance might be succeeding later, because one thing we know to be true in performance is that actually our performances are quite up and down, and that being successful now doesn't always demonstrate success later. So maybe that performance that we're working towards is going to be something like the Shanghai Games. So whatever performance looks like for you, what we want to do is actually take a bit of control into that and start thinking skills. What skills can you learn and deploy to be successful? Because the fact of the matter is, the pathway is rather bumpy. And what we don't want to do is just hope or rely on the fact that the bumpiness of the pathway that we'll experience, the natural highs and lows that come with being a high-level performer, that you will be resilient. Because without the skills to deal with those highs and lows, what we tend to see is that people really struggle. Now, an example of that comes from some research that we've done in this world, where actually what we're trying to do is look at what we call the super champs. So a super champ within a sporting environment is someone who is that absolute household name. So they've got 50+ international caps in a team sport, or they've you know, multiple medal winners at world level or Olympic level, Commonwealth level. So those real household names. And every single time we've spoken to a super champ, we've matched them demographically. So we've gone and found someone from a really similar socioeconomic status, you know, match them on their gender, on their upbringing, all of those sorts of ideas to eliminate any of those other possibilities to do with opportunity or whatever that might be. But we've looked at mapping their profile against a champ. And a champ is, you know, someone who is truly in that top 1%, you know, international, represented their sport internationally 2 or 3 times, maybe qualified, attended an Olympics or a world champs, but perhaps not tipped into those medal opportunities. And then we've also mapped that against what we would call an almost. An almost being someone who is successful at age group level. So in sport, that could be, you know, in your under 18 sort of age, but for whatever reason, don't tip into the long-term senior success. An example of an almost pathway looks a bit like this. So this is within rugby. And for those of you who are familiar with team sports, you might think this makes a reasonable amount of sense. So they've maybe joined their school team around 11.5, pushing on to 12 years old. They start representing their school team just before they're 15. So we're talking year 10. Start to represent their school first team, get signed to a professional rugby club, and start representing their country international under 18s before the age of 17. Ostensibly, to look at, you think, yeah, that player's going somewhere. That person's tipped for success. They're representing their country at international under 18s. You know, I'm kind of a big deal. Maybe you've heard of me. Sign for their first rugby team and start being a first team member at 19. Oh, fantastic, I've made it. You know, walk into the club, put your black card down, drinks are on me. However, because this performer had such a linear pathway, a linear progression, what we tend to see is that actually they didn't have these skills that we're talking about. They weren't able to develop the end product of resilience at all, but they've also not been able to develop these skills that you guys have already spoken about, this idea of investing your time, you know, having a real passion and the right attitude, and trying to make sure that your practice is quality, or dealing with what it feels like to be deselected, what it feels like to not qualify, what it feels like to think you're going to go and be successful, but do you know what, it's just not your day. And instead, when this performer got sent out on loan, which for those of you who know team sports will know that's quite a turbulent time in a performer's journey, that was a real low for them. And again, they weren't equipped with the skills to deal with that. So they moved on, said, well, that's not me. I'm not the kind of player who gets sent out on loan, signed for a different Premiership team. And lo and behold, they weren't able to deal with that. They didn't have the skills, the psychological skills to be successful. And now they would be playing Division 2 rugby. So still a successful performer, nothing to be taken away from that person. They've internationally represented their country, age group, but probably not achieved what you might expect them to. Now, what's really interesting is that we've done this in sport, in military, in performing arts, and in business. So let's have a look at a business example. So someone who I think we could probably all agree successful. Do we think, give me a thumbs up on your reaction if you think that Steve Jobs probably had a really easy pathway, if you think that it was an easy journey for Steve, it was just up, 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 up. But give me a clap back on the reactions if you reckon that Steve maybe had more of a turbulent uppy downy journey. So Abby was in there quick. She thinks it was easy for Steve. Oh no, Abby's changed her mind. Clara, Hannah, George, Lewis, Simone. Fantastic. So actually we're all agreeing that chances are probably wasn't all that easy for Steve. And we look at this scenario, and as you can see, a huge amount of turbulence from really early on in their pathway, in his pathway, and lots of sort of what we would call performance specific highs and lows. So as you can see, you know, lots of highs being founding his products, having these projects, resigning from his job, sports specific or performance specific highs and lows, but maybe some personal ones as well, and actually struggling early on in his life, struggling in terms of his personal life, lots of highs and lows. And what's really, really interesting is that those highs and lows carried on well into Steve Jobs, late into his career. So the whole point that I'm making here is that bumpiness is essential. We need a bit of bumpiness. We like bumpiness. But for bumpiness to be useful, for your end point to still be that sense of resilience and success, what we want to make sure is that you've got the skills to be successful along that pathway. So without any further ado, this is them. The 10 skills, the PCDEs, psychological characteristics of developing excellence. You can see why we call them PCDEs. But these are the 10 things that across those super champs, champs versus almosts, that the super champs were displaying. And they were displaying this in across, as I've already mentioned, sport industries, performing arts industries, music and drama industries, military industries, and business industries. So we see these completely across the field, that actually people who have got these skills tend to be successful. And just as a little example, a nice little snippet for you that we'll just watch.
A minha opinião, e vou arriscar, eu acho que 20 a 30% ele nasceu. O restante ficou sacrifício, com o trabalho dele, com muita dedicação, porque ele tinha muito potencial. Mas nós aqui, também no Nacional, temos miúdos com muito potencial, como ele tinha também na altura. Só que ele depois, com esse potencial, trabalhou, teve muito sacrifício.
So I'm hoping I remember to share my sound and you haven't all just had to very quickly learn Portuguese or read subtitles. But in essence, as you can see there, I mean, who are we talking about on the chat there? Who are they talking about and what are they saying that performer had that the others didn't? What did that performer had that seemed to be the difference? And who was it? Who are they talking about? Absolutely, Brendan. Yeah. So talking about Ronaldo, and the difference seemed to be this sense of determination. They say actually there were just as many performers that had just the same amount of talent as him. But the difference was that, you know, that hard work ethic, that effort we're putting in, that sense of determination. So let's have a little look at how we might define these PCDEs. And if you've got any questions about any of them specifically, we can look at them afterwards. But what we've got here is, we'll just go through them in order. Well, I say in order, there is no order really. So commitment we'll start with. So we've got this idea that actually commitment is all about how well you as a performer can commit to the focus and the levels of effort you need to be successful. And that might be when you are sort of in a training environment or when you're at work and actually saying, this is the level of effort I need to put in to get this job done. But it also might be the level of effort you know you need to narrow into to commit to be successful in a competition, for example. So very much about this idea of not just knowing what that level is, but how you can achieve it. Role clarity. Now, this is one that tends to be forgotten about quite often. But actually, what we would suggest is that role clarity is the ability to know what you need to do to be successful, know what's required of you, and know what's expected of those around you. So similarly, if you're in a team setting, that could as much be, what am I expecting from my teammates versus what are they expecting of me? Versus, okay, if you've just got the qualifying event or a heat event at a competition, what do I need to do in order to get out of this heat versus what do I think I need to do in order to go on and be successful in the main competition? So role clarity is something that people tend to forget about because we're either really focused on ourselves or we're not considering how our role might change in our different facets of performance. So role clarity, a hugely underestimated PCD. Self-regulation. Now, I must admit, I think the step before self-regulation is self-awareness. So if self-regulation is being able to control the effect pressure might have on you, then the first step is, of course, going to be knowing how pressure affects you. Personally, I feel my pressure, I feel my anxiety much more than I think it. So I have what we would call a somatic reaction, much more than a mental one. So, you know, if I check my phone and I've got 5 missed calls from one of my parents, I think, oh my gosh, what's happened? You know, and immediately I can feel a heavy weight on my chest. You know, I get sort of really clammy hands. I get really panicky. Whereas other people, sorry, for me, it would make sense that I self-regulate myself in a very physical way. So I spend a lot of time practicing deep breaths. I've just bought a Bop It, which you may or may not know what that means, but it's a sort of fun little game and it gets really intense. And I use that to practice managing my deep breathing, dealing with sort of a bit of a hectic environment around me and dealing with the fact that my body is physically reacting to that pressure. Whereas lots of other people might feel their pressure a bit more mentally. They would have what we would call a cognitive reaction. And you start to think, oh my gosh, like, I'm not even sure I deserve to be wearing the Squad UK jersey. Should I even be here? Am I a complete fraud? I don't even know how to do my restaurant service anymore. You know, I've forgotten how to do CNC milling. It's a complete mystery to me. So actually, you might think your pressure a lot more. So it would make sense that you start to self-regulate in a much more mental way. And you might start to reason with those, or maybe try and, you know, attack those thoughts and think, where are they coming from? That, of course, is particularly important. So we call it the theory of ironic processes. If I told you not to think about just a big polar bear dancing around. So I always like to think of your brain, your cognitive capacity is like a stage. There's only so much we can fit on the stage. Whereas your attention is basically the spotlight. And every single time you tell yourself not to think about something, you're just drawing the spotlight back to it. So we're better off tackling that thought than we are just not thinking about it. Actually, you know, why am I having that? What do I know to be true that I can rationalize against that thought? So yeah, self-regulation, very important, but it's worthwhile having a think about how you might experience that pressure first. Next up, we've got effective and controllable imagery. Now, I won't lie to you, psychologists, we like to argue over, you know, what's the best performance mindset and how's the best way to get there. But one thing we all agree on is the importance of imagery. So this is a really key PCDE that we've seen across those super champs that we've been talking about. And what that tends to mean is that not only can you sort of picture something, but it's under your volitional control. So perhaps you want to picture a competition where something doesn't go quite right, and you actually want to experience, how would I tackle that? You know, how would it feel? What would my plan be? And how would I act out that plan? But making sure that you've got the control and the know-how of your performance to be able to have that impact, absolutely essential. Quality practice. Now, you guys have all already listed this one on the chat, basically, because practice and investing your time and your effort was a key part of what you thought made the difference when I first asked that question. So I know you all agree with quality practice. The difference with quality practice is that, again, that's probably going to look different for different people. So for some people, quality practice would mean quite a long period of time invested. So it allows them to kind of switch in and off, as opposed to having to be really, really intense for an hour, for example. Whereas other people would rather switch everything off and just commit to that hour of quality practice. Are you making sure that your practice is always cognitively engaging? You're always challenging yourself? Are you always making sure that it's progressive? That, you know, what you do at the start of the session builds so that by the end of the session, you're working towards something a little bit more representative of your competition environment. So quality practice, a key one that I know you all already agree with. Realistic performance evaluations. Now this is another favorite. I'd say I like them all, obviously, so I shouldn't call them all favorites, but realistic performance evaluations, an absolutely essential one. What we tend to find with lots of performers is that some of you are really self-deprecating, you're really hard on yourselves. And even if you go out and put in your absolute best performance, you'll still think there was something wrong with it. So some of you might be a bit like that. Whereas actually what we tend to also see is that some people, they might go out and not actually perform their best, maybe not put in the effort that they need to, but they'll come in off the competition floor and they'll say, well, that was unlucky. And they're just always the unlucky ones. So what we tend to talk about is, you know, a really good idea, and this is something you could start, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So always picking 3 things that you think you did really well in that performance that you'd like to replicate. And for those of you who are quite self-deprecating, that will obviously encourage you to do and to start thinking about the things that you want to repeat more. 2 bads, and that's things that you didn't perform as well as you should have. You know you've got the capacity to be better. Those are the 2 things I'm going to start working on. But then you've got your 1 ugly. And that's the thing that you do that is just so out of character, so ridiculous that it's not even worth dwelling on anymore. Let's just leave it in the gutter where it belongs. And so the good, the bad, and the ugly, what we tend to find is that by including the ugly, it stops us dwelling on the really silly thing that we've done. Maybe it was a really silly decision that you made in the height of the competition that you can see now was the wrong thing to do. You know, maybe you mistimed your preparation, so you weren't ready to get going, or whatever it might be. But the good, the bad, and the ugly, a really nice, clear, consistent way to get your realistic performance evaluations working. And the beauty of that is that if you start to take note of that and do that consistently after your performances, you'll probably start to see the bads start to come into the goods, and then new things to work on will come up and up and up. And that can really guide your quality practice quite effectively. It's also nice ways if you ever have like a parent or a tutor or someone pick you up after an event and all they want to do is talk about how did it go, what happened, and you don't want to live it play by play. You can say, right, the good, the bad, and the ugly, you digest those together, and then you can move on from the event and reflect on those reflections after a couple of days, instead of having to relive a play-by-play of your competition, because I'm sure you've all had to do that before. Next up, planning and self-organisation. Now, for you guys in your disciplines, I'm sure you all know that this is absolutely essential. And for some of you, this might be your forte. You might be truly fantastic planners and self-organisations, knowing what is optimal performance and what do I need to do in order to prepare myself for that. For some of you, that might not be the easiest part of your performance. So actually, perhaps that's something to start thinking about now, and actually having that preparation. And it could be as simple as, you know, food prepping for the weekend competition ahead, or food prepping for your performance, so you don't have to worry about cognitively. We always struggle when we're tired or we don't get the right nutrition. So you're thinking about it that way. Whereas for other people, it might be, okay, actually, who can I go and get the support from? Maybe can I have someone evaluate my performances before I go into competition, so I've got a good idea of where I'm pitching, something like that. Focus and distraction control. Now, this is a great one, because again, a lot of you have come up with this already on the chat. So this idea of being able to focus on yourself and kind of keep pushing even when things are perhaps not going the way that you would like them to. So focus and distraction control. It's not just knowing what you need to focus on, but it's knowing how you're going to do that and how you're going to avoid those other distractions. Lots of different tools for this, and focus and distraction control looks different for different people. So just having that awareness of, okay, well, what is my best focus and how can I get there? You know, whether that's whenever you start scrolling the internet on your computer and then you go and look at if the internet on your tiny computer is any different. Actually, let me just put this away, or putting timings on your phone so that you're not scrolling for too long, versus actually what's focus and distraction control in competition. I know there's going to be other people competing around me. I know I'm going to see them out of the corner of my eye, or I know I'm competing for this spot with someone else. I need to not worry about what they're doing. I need to focus on actually putting in the best performance I can. You know, what tools might you use for that? Penultimate one, goal setting and self-reward. Now, I'm pretty sure if I asked every single person on this call, or every single person that's watching this after the fact, if they were, if you had a goal, you'd probably say yes. You'd know where you want to be in a year's time. You'd have an idea of where you'd like to be in 2 or 3 years' time. And you might even, if you're really well prepared, have an idea of how you're going to get there. But the bigger question is, A, when did you last check in on your progress? Are you now where you thought you would be a year ago? And B, if you are, have you given yourself the pat on the back that you very rightly deserve for achieving that goal? Goal setting is fantastic. It is the bread and butter of psychology and successful performance, knowing what you want to achieve and how you're going to get there. But actually, it loses its motivating factor if you don't check in on your progress. So whether that's alarms that you set every 3 months on your phone to say, right, let's check in on my goals, or whether that's knowing how you're going to reward yourself once you achieve it. What is it that you're going to do to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and you're acknowledging your efforts and your success? And then last, but absolutely not least, and I suppose the reason this one is long and thin is because it fitted on the slide, but actually I like it being here because I think it underpins all of these other PCDEs. Seeking and using social support. Super champs are able to effectively build and use their network around them. No one is supposed to be successful on their own. And so actually what we see is that it is all about knowing who is around you and how they can support you, and knowing when, and indeed when not, to seek that support. For lots of people, they feel really nervous and really uneasy about asking these questions and seeking the support. So I always talk about maybe going to those people around you with solutions. I've really struggled with this technique. I'm really not sure to do what to do in this scenario. I'm finding myself struggling with this part of the process. I think the answer's this. What do you think? So if you're someone who really struggles to just ask for help, try to reframe what you're asking for. You're not asking for help, you're asking for clarity on your ideas. What do you think? So be a solution focused sort of support seeker. But whatever you do, seek the support, it makes the difference. So those are the 10 PCDs. If you've got your phone out, I would actively encourage you to take a quick picture of this now so that you can see them, you've got them in front of you, because we'll be talking about these for the rest of the session. So what I'm keen to understand is does anyone have any questions? Are there any uncertainties about what these PCDs are? Are there any that you agree with, disagree with? Any questions or thoughts? So if they're all good and you think you're happy with them, again, give me a little thumbs up on your action so I know you're still with me and you're still here. Happy days. So we're happy with them. Now, the really important thing to consider with PCDs is that they will look different for different people. They'll look different in different disciplines, and they'll probably look different for you now than they will down like a year down the line. You know, if you're not used to self-regulation, if you typically struggle under that pressure and you're not used to even being aware of how you react to it, then self-regulation for you right now will just be acknowledging that you're being affected by the pressure, versus self-regulation down the line will be the ability to acknowledge and handle and deal with that pressure, maybe even have some tools and skills in place to do something beforehand. But it will look different. But what we want to understand is how it will look for you. So a couple of examples, you know, if we were going to operationalize these, and when we say operationalize, what we mean is, what do they look like? What are the behaviors that you might display if you are, for example, really effectively deploying your commitment? So in one environment, what we might see is that actually for someone in the last year, when perhaps you've struggled to get on site in college, wherever you're sort of completing your discipline at the moment, it might have been signing up for all the virtual parts of the course and staying really engaged, completing your work, completing your coursework, you know, whatever it might have been. Commitment for you was actually, I just want to push on and do what I need to do and take advantage of those opportunities. Versus actually commitment for you might have looked like seeking these opportunities for extra development and actually maybe trying to complete any virtual competitions or compete in any virtual competitions if such a thing existed for your discipline. But more than that, preparing for them and saying, okay, what's the commitment? What's the level of effort I need? So again, you know, commitment looks different for different people. And that's the question, you know, what might it look like for you? Have a think, because what we're going to do is look at a couple more and then we'll jump into a breakout room, and it'd be great to see what you think those different skills would look like for you. Next up, again, we're operationalizing these PCDs. The best way for you to develop PCDs is to think, what would it look like if I was doing it successfully? So for focus and distraction control, we know that that is knowing what's important and staying focused, but knowing how to do that. So again, in one scenario, that might have been that whilst you were working or learning from home, you were able to keep your phone off during any of your sessions, or maybe chunking your self-practice sessions to make them more manageable. So managing your diary and managing your day effectively. So you are working when you were most effective. Maybe you're a morning person, or maybe actually you'd rather have a chilled out morning and focus a little bit more in the afternoon. Versus for someone else, it might look like sticking to a routine to get ready before one of those competitions, before you're going to compete. So what we might call a pre-performance routine. But also, you know, maybe planning in your downtime for social interactions with friends. So all of a sudden, you know that actually I'll be much better at not getting distracted in the build up to a competition if I know when I'm going to see these people. And then I can commit to those days and say, yeah, happy. And now I can focus in on what I need to do to be successful for this next big event that's coming up. So again, what might that look like for you? Last example one, what I want you to do is have a think about maybe seeking and using social support. So an absolutely key part of what we see as the difference between those super champs and those almosts, that ability to not just build, but use your performance network around you, knowing who you can go to with each question and what support, you know, you might be able to seek from them. So for some people, that might be sort of having a friendship group that supports you with your demands, logistical demands perhaps, but also maybe that's more of a mental or a well-being demand. But knowing you've got a group of people around you, and this is, they're really good to talk to about this, and these people are really good to talk about my performance problems, whatever that might be. Versus actually, it might be being able to speak to your training manager or a tutor, or someone within the Squad UK session to ask for technical advice. Or maybe you can reach out to someone who's on your discipline and say, well, I'm really struggling with this. What do you think? Versus actually, who can I go to for extra support with maybe work commitments or something like that? So again, that final question, what might it look like for you? So what we're going to do now is I'm conscious of time. So what we'll do is we're going to jump into a breakout room just for 5 or 10 minutes to start to discuss what do we think these PCDEs might look like for you. And that's what I'm keen to understand. Pick maybe 2 of the PCDEs, the ones that you think would have the biggest impact on your performance and right now, and just think about what that might look like and what it would, what it would feel like, or what behaviours you would see if you were deploying those PCDEs effectively. So there they are again. Hopefully you've already got a picture of them up on your phone already. So I imagine we will just wait for Hannah to pop you into some breakout rooms, just have a chat, introduce yourselves, and just quickly start to think about, okay, what PCD do we think is going to be really important for us in our ambitions over the next 18 months? And what would they look like if we were doing them effectively? And then if someone from your breakout room wants to maybe have a quick chat about them, dedicate someone to talk about it afterwards, that would be fantastic. So if Hannah can open up, great.
So I'm just going to do them now. I'm going to assign you guys automatically. I'm just going to look.
And then for those of you who are watching this back in your own time, just write them down, write down a couple and have a little bit of a think about which of these things you reckon would make the most difference. Okay, welcome back everybody. Coming back in the room. So I know we had 2 breakout rooms going, so I'm hoping there was maybe one person from each, or maybe even a couple, who might like to just tell me what they think one of those PCDs would look like for you, and how would you know you were deploying it effectively. So we'll start with breakout room 1. I think you should know which one you were in. Is there anyone in breakout room 1 who wants to tell me actually which of these PCDs do they really want to work towards, and what might it look like?
Firstly, I'm not sure what breakout room I was actually in. Didn't see where it was. I don't know if anybody knows.
you just tell us what you think.
I should have kept quiet. Damn it. Yeah, I personally felt like quality practice made a big difference, because you could, as you're going along, you could just see the improvement in your work, and it'll give you an option to try out new things and learn new skills and just improve existing ones. As I said before.
Fantastic, thank you, George. And one of the things that we were having a quick chat about was this idea of how might you notice when you're slipping out of quality practice? Because actually, we all start with the best intentions of our practice being a really high quality and knowing what we're trying to achieve out of it. And it's cognitively engaging, it's progressively challenging, it's all those things that we want. How might we notice when we're not actually being that quality anymore? What do you guys think? Go on, George.
Damn it. I'm not usually this vocal. Yeah, I think definitely it's when you I compare my work back to what I've done previously. Go, right, here's the task done, here's the output. Does it stack up? If it's make a character, a 3D model of a character, right? Here's the last one I made. Is it better? Is it worse? Is it different? Like, what's kind of changed? Just self-comparison. Is it on my level of work? And of course, external feedback is also useful. I've got a very opinionated group of friends who are all in the 3D field. So if I ever make anything, they get to see it and critique it. So that's quite useful.
Fantastic. So that's brilliant. And this idea, I'm sure lots of us could take that, actually just kind of having a a level of what we think is something we talk about a lot with lots of my sports performers is what is exceptional, acceptable and unacceptable. Now, those things tend to change on a given day, certainly in a performance sense of what's exceptional, acceptable and unacceptable. But I imagine actually once you've started to dip out of acceptable and into unacceptable on your practice, then maybe that could be a key sort of little cue to say, do you know what, I should probably leave this here. Now, Hendo's put a really interesting point in the chat that, you know, for him, it's going to be self-regulation, keeping time aside, set aside, because he's really busy. We can see he's very busy as he's plumbing something whilst he's joined us on this call. And I think actually that's a really good point, that we need to make sure we've got time to manage that self-regulation, because if it's just something we expect to happen to us, as opposed to something that we actually work towards, that's going to be quite important. Again, a lot of what we might talk about is the difference between letting it happen versus making it happen. And our best performances tend to be typified by this very effortful, you know, performance. I think if you guys think about perhaps some of your qualifying performances or the performances that got you into your Squad UK spot, they probably were, you know, really gritty, really hard. So self-regulation is something that we have to really take time to make sure we include. Anyone else who thinks maybe there's another PCD that they'd really like to chat through what that might look like for you? What would those PCDs look like? On the chat, or have a conversation, whatever you feel more comfortable with.
Hi, so I would maybe say the goal setting and self-reward. Like, I know that I have a goal that I want to be the one selected for Shanghai and to be there, but I don't have some kind of like the steps to do it. And even what I prefer is somebody setting me the goal and then saying, okay, so in a month or two, I will discuss with you how did you get on. But if it's only myself setting the goal for me, and even if I don't reach it, or, you know, it's not done, there is nobody who can say like, okay, so I'll just forget it, I have not done it, and maybe I will start another one. So this is maybe for me that setting the goal is, I'm not sure how to do it properly, you know. So that's the biggest trouble for me, I would say.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So actually we know that that's something that you really want to work towards, but it's still not entirely clear at what that would look like, because your personal preference is to maybe have someone else holding you accountable for your goals, but that's maybe not always possible. This is where you'll probably start to see why we call it a hand of cards, because we want to be able to deploy maybe 2 or 3 cards when we find ourselves in these situations. So maybe for Simona, it's going to be this idea that your goal setting and self-reward needs to be supported with that seeking and using social support. So whether you find a tutor or a friend or someone who you can say, actually, this is what I'm trying to achieve. I've decided that these are going to be my time points of, you know, what I want to, how I want to be looking, you know, with 6 months out, 9 months out, 10 months out. Can you ask me how I'm doing? Can you actually drop me a message, or can we like book in a time to have a call, and you can say, you know, you set this goal, how do you think you're doing? And if you've, you know, surpassed it, brilliant. What's the next goal? What's the reward? Don't forget. But also, if you're not quite there, okay, then what can you do to start to, you know, let's reevaluate that goal. Was it too ambitious? Have we not put the time in? What can we do to make sure we get there within the next, you know, X number of weeks? So again, you can see that linking up, that perhaps effective goal setting and self-reward for you might have to require a little bit of seeking and using that social support. Clara thinks on the chat that actually planning training in advance so you can keep to a schedule makes you feel a lot better when you know that this is what you've got to do, and then you know you're not wasting any valuable time. Absolutely. So again, this idea, and a couple of people in the breakout rooms I jumped into were discussing this idea of planning and self-organization being really, really essential. And for those of you who that's not naturally occurring, kind of thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to hold myself accountable for it? So similarly with that planning idea that Clara's put up, probably some focus and distraction control is going to be essential. By what time do I want to have achieved these things? If I miss that time, I'm not just going to write off the day. how can I actually maybe make sure I have an effective evening or a useful week? It's really easy to get to Monday or Tuesday and think, well, that's the whole week gone. No, what can I still do to make sure I'm successful? Something that might be quite useful, especially for those of you that are really busy, and I know everyone sort of, you've all probably taken a lot of time to make sure you were here today, and those of you who are watching this back, what you might want to do is plan, instead of trying to think so day by day, think, okay, over the next week, I would like to get 5 training sessions in. And it might be that you manage all of those across Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And you do a couple of afternoons and mornings, and then you've done your 5 by Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then anything else is bonus extra training. Whereas on those other weeks where you're really going to struggle to get to it, and you've only managed 2 or 3 by Friday, you think, okay, great, I'm going to put some time aside on Sunday morning to really push on and get a couple of my training sessions sorted. So it might be that you want to just change the way you think about your planning. And I don't want to be too stuck on day by day to-do lists, because if I'm unsuccessful, it just gets cast onto my next to-do list every day until I forget. So instead, what am I trying to achieve in the week? And if I get it done early, happy days, I can have a bit of a rest and relaxation. If I struggle to get it done, okay, then this is a busy week and I've really got to push on. Of course, we've got to listen to our minds and our bodies. Now, we are sort of running out of time. So we would normally go for a quick break and fill that with a bit of a video. So what I think we'll do is we'll just move straight onto the video, because it's quite cool, it's quite fun, and it just shows these PCDEs in another different setting. So when you watch this and take this opportunity just to stretch your legs if you haven't already, grab a drink. It's a few minutes long, 3 or 4 minutes long, so you've got time to go and do that. But those of you who are going to stick with me, just have a little watch. It's just something quite fun to watch in the background. And what I want you to do is think about, do you see any of the PCDEs in action? Can you see any PCDE taking place right now that you think is the reason perhaps for, I don't know, maybe spoiler alert, but a bit of success?
When Damien told me about his stunt, it just freaks me out. The fact that he's doing a backflip without seeing the car approaching, for me, it's crazy. As a racing car driver, and all the people that I met, other drivers and courageous drivers, and I can tell you need to be really crazy to do this kind of stunts. This is dangerous. I don't think that a normal thing to do to jump over a car. I'm here to coach his stunt driver, Alistair. It makes me nervous, actually, that he's driving the Formula E for the first time. But, it's 4 wheels, a steering wheel, a brake, and accelerate. It will be easy. I hope. The team has been rehearsal all day, very intense day, actually. Alistair will start at the beginning of the straights, adjust the speed, more or less at 100 kilometers per hour. He will cross the lasers. Then he will drive towards Damien, but he will be offset.
Way too early.
We go through this all day long, and once the team is happy with it, and the timings, everything is perfect, then we go for real, hopefully. He needs to be really precise. If he jumps too early, he will hit the back of the car. Well, and if he forgets or he's late on the jump, well.
diving at you. And I'm looking at you. I'm like, please jump, please jump.
Obviously, don't try that at home. That is not the best way to learn your PCDEs. But I mean, what did you see in there? A real true performance environment, you know, really high stress, lots of consequences. What PCDEs do you think that those performers were actually implementing? Again, ideas on the chat, whatever you think.
I'd probably say self-regulation, because you noticed him like doing deep breaths beforehand, and it's at that point he can't afford to get in his own head. You know, he has to keep a clear mind and know exactly what he's doing. He can't afford to sort of get too nervous or let himself get in his own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, Lewis. So a huge amount of self-regulation. And we've spoken already about, you know, the first step to that is knowing how am I going to react in this situation. And you mentioned maybe some physical things there, that deep breathing. And you also mentioned there, you know, not letting someone get in your, not getting in your own head. Some ideas on the chat, lots of planning, Brendan thinks, commitment, distraction control. So yeah, there's a huge amount of quality practice, huge amount of organization. Isaac thinks some realistic performance evaluations. So, you know, knowing when it wasn't going well enough at the beginning and actually thinking, yeah, what do we need to do? For Hannah, it was that commitment to the practice, so the quality practice, but also knowing, you know, commitment, what's the level of effort I need to be successful here. Seeking and using social support, Abby thinks, yeah, that was a whole squad there, a whole team. Just like you guys have got, you've got your Squad UK, so it's a whole organisation, a whole team available for you. And again, some of us might have needed some different PCDs to be successful there. I obviously would have needed the ability to do a backflip to be successful there. I would have needed that also. But it would look different for different people. And that's the really interesting thing. And I think taking what Lewis was just suggesting about this idea of self-regulation being important, and maybe, you know, lots of deep breathing to physically deal with that pressure, but also making sure that mentally there were no concerns. And so one thing that I thought was worthwhile us talking about was this idea of the different types of stress response. You're in a situation, you're in an environment here where actually what we know is that there's an awful lot going on, and you're also quite far down the line in terms of your career or discipline. You're in Squad UK, working towards perhaps representing at Shanghai. So we're quite far down the line. So for some of you, you might be looking at these PCDEs and already thinking, yeah, I already do some of that. I need to do a bit more, or I need to start doing this. So that's why I thought, instead of picking them apart again, let's actually look at maybe some of the other stuff that's going on for you, so we can start to improve that self-awareness and the ideas of how you might deploy them. So types of stress response, what we tend to see is that reactions to pressure tend to come in the ways in which you approach stress. Now, stress is simply the product of your perception that the demands of a situation outweigh your resources. So if we're looking at how we define stress, it's the physical manifestation, if you will, or mental manifestation of your perception that the demands of a task outweigh the resources. So our guys that we just watched, you know, they didn't really seem to get too stressed about it because clearly they felt they had the resources to deal with those demands. And we only get stressed when we see a gap there. But actually, stress doesn't necessarily always have to be this negative thing. And there are two sort of main stress responses that have been hypothesized. And we've got this idea that actually some people will really see stress as a challenge. You know, that get in there response, you know, this is my opportunity to thrive. Whereas some people will see stress as a threat, this hang in there idea. You know, gosh, you know, I've just got to get on with this. I've just got to make it through this next event, or, you know, I really want to represent, you know, Squad UK, but I'm really worried about all of those things that might happen. Now, these tend to be actually dictated by quite a hormonal, well, we talk everything is biopsychosocial, really. So, I'm going to talk about those hormones, but that's the biopsycho element, but the psychosocial is of course impacting as well, because it's how you integrate with your team around you as well. But what we tend to see is that cortisol levels look a bit like this. Now, cortisol is, in essence, it's the main stress hormone that the body produces. It's the body's inbuilt alarm system. And what we see is that as we get closer to performance, there's actually, typically speaking, a dip. There's an increase for both of them as we get closer and closer to those performances, with a bit of a dip in the build up to performance for some. But that actually the cortisol levels go up a lot more in stress, people who experience stress as a threatening thing versus those who might see stress as a threatening thing. Now, what we see is that cortisol can actually, it can increase wound healing time, for example. So actually the higher level cortisol, the more that your body struggles to recover. And that can be, with something quite, physical, but also mentally. We've got this idea that actually, long-term high level cortisol can reduce bone density, things like that. There's also a really high link for adrenaline in flashbulb memories. Now, flashbulb memory is when a big event happens, and these can be really public events. They typically respond with like a big, an unexpected celebrity event or something like this, but they can also be really personal. But they're typically threatening events. So they're quite negative celebrity event, maybe a celebrity death or something like this, or maybe quite a difficult, harmful time. Now, actually, what's really interesting is that there's a reason for that, and that this stress as a threat idea can sometimes be a good idea, because we as humans have grown, we are evolved from the people who, didn't eat the poison berries, who did run away from the saber-toothed tiger, and didn't just think this was going to be a fun idea and, oh yeah, this looks like a challenge to take on. So both of these stress versus threat and stress versus challenge can be suitable at different times. And having something like those flashbulb memories of a difficult time can encourage you to avoid some of those situations before. So similarly, what we see here is the catecholamines levels as well. Now, catecholamines hormones they're secreted from your adrenal glands, but they're basically things like dopamine or adrenaline. And again, as you can see, there's very little adrenaline spikes for those who are experiencing that stress as a threat. Whereas actually, when we can see that perhaps we are physically or emotionally stressed, your body secretes these types of hormones to support yourself. So in this scenario, people who are actually experiencing that stress as a challenge idea do have that really, really big peaking increase in the build up to performance. Now that's really interesting, because people who are actually maybe experiencing that rush of adrenaline, they might be perceiving that in the wrong way. They might be perceiving that as a stress as a threat idea. Whereas actually what we want to be thinking about is, maybe this is my body getting me ready for the challenge, getting me ready for something in that regard. So in terms of those different stress response mechanisms, what we know is that those of us who are experiencing stress as a challenge, we're much more likely to kind of think, okay, what's my solution? What's the problem, and how can I engage in my solution focused coping? But they might still experiencing that flight element of the fight or flight response. But the difference is that actually a stressor is a short-term challenge and it's not insurmountable. I can overcome this. But again, stress is a threat. Whenever I feel afraid, what do I do? System. It allows us to have quite consistent patterns in how we react to things. And that sometimes actually stress is something to avoid. And I want to put in these counter strategies. And we tend to engage in emotion-focused coping. The really interesting thing is, and we spoke about this right early on in the beginning of this session, your road to success is going to be bumpy. It's going to be up and down. And there are going to be some occasions when that problem-focused coping, that perception of stress as a challenge, is going to be essential. But more than that, there are going to be other occasions that sometimes you will need emotion-focused coping. You'll need the ability to actually shield yourself from not the challenges, but from, you know, the other impacts. So using both of those correctly. And again, your self-regulation, absolutely essential here. You seeking and using social support, absolutely essential here. But what we know is that stress response, we can actually use both of these responses. And even though you might be more naturally inclined towards one, we can develop and progress those further using skills like your PCDs. But the final thing that I really wanted you to think about is not just what those PCDs might look like, but when they might be essential. Now, there's a term that we like to use. Now, if I was to use the term periodization in terms of physical periodization, a couple of you might understand what I'm talking about, you know, especially if you're someone who's quite into health and fitness and maybe you're quite keen at training. You're probably quite familiar with the idea of having a micro, macro, mesocycle for your physical training. You're probably all on board with, you know, overloading in the off season, tapering down before a competition. Absolutely. You know, for years and years and years, everyone knows you cannot just force your body to perform at 100% all the time, because we'll get injured, we'll get ill, we'll burn out. Yet seemingly people think that when it comes to mental effort, we should just switch on and we should stay there. We should continue to put that mental effort in 100% of the time. And that might be over the course of a year, they think that might be over the course of an event trip. So, you know, lots of your event trips are probably international. They could take quite a long time. People think they should be switched on 100% the whole time. Or even during an individual event, people might think that. Now, what's the problem with expecting 100% effort from yourself, 100% cognitive engagement, 100% mental effort all of the time? What do we think might happen if that's the expectation you've got on yourself? What could possibly happen? I can see some typing going on. Yeah, so for Abby, we're thinking maybe setting an unachievable goal. So we're going to be really have unrealistic expectations of ourselves. We're going to be disappointed when we don't achieve them. Absolutely. Any other ideas of what you think might happen if we actually try and keep that mental effort up there really high? 100% of the time, run yourself down. Yeah, 100% Clara. And what will happen is we will crash. And that crash might come, yeah, Hannah thinks could disappoint yourself, lose motivation. Also, Lewis agrees, lose motivation if things start to go wrong. What typically we see is that that might be a dip in performance because you've obviously been expecting too much of yourself. And as you guys suggest, that's probably going to impact your motivation. It might manifest itself physically. So this could be, you know, when you get an injury or you know, an illness. So I'm someone who always gets lots of ulcers when I'm really stressed, and I know that I've gone too far then. But for some people, you know, that's when they start to get really run down. Or, like we said, a huge performance slip up. Whereas actually what we probably need to consider is this idea of considering when our peaks and troughs in our performance requirements are. When are your big events at college coming up? When have you got your exams or your practical skills assessments? So you'll need to peak for those. When are the qualifying events that you want to peak for? Versus when are actually opportunities that you can have a bit of a lull. We spoke about this in one of the breakout rooms. Someone was saying, I have to make sure I've got downtime because otherwise I'm just working and it's ridiculous. And that's completely true. We tend to see in a sports setting that when people feel guilty that they're not practicing, they'll go and do a practice session, but it won't be quality. And that can either have a detrimental effect on their performance or they'll end up injured. And for you guys, if you're thinking, gosh, no, I feel really guilty that I'm not practicing, I'm not training, I'm not revising, and you'll do something, but probably quite half-heartedly. And it might end up actually having more of a negative impact than it does a positive one. So what we'd like to get you thinking about is this idea of how can you manage yourself, your periodization over maybe just a single competition, a single event, maybe over an event week. What's that week going to look like for you? When do you need to peak and when can you afford that downtime? But maybe even in your preparation for Shanghai, how is this going to look over the next 18 months? What do I want my season to look like? And when do I want to peak? And more importantly, how am I going to get there? What we tend to see is that actually people are often really good at either they're quite good at switching off, so they're really happy to drop everything, but then they struggle to get themselves back up ready for a big competition. So how are you going to re-engage yourself? Certainly after the end of a big competition you've been working towards for like 18 months, how do you now re-engage with a normal cycle? But we also tend to see lots of people, as I mentioned, really struggle with switching off. So what does that look like for you? You know, is that you're seeking and using social support PCDE, that I want to go and spend some time, quality time with people? Or is that your self-regulation, focus and distraction control? And actually it's just, you know, a long heart bath and a Gilmore Girls marathon, whatever works for you. So starting to think about these principles of psychological periodization, absolutely essential. Now, I'm conscious that that has been a lot of information, but luckily we've obviously recorded this so you can have a little look and watch it back. But what I want you to start considering is, okay, actually, how and when might I be deploying these PCDEs? How will it work for me? And that could be because you've got a big life event coming up. You know, maybe you're practicing for a driving test or something like that. I've got a big life event. What PCDs can I deploy at this for this? Quality practice, my focus and distraction control, self-regulation with my nerves. PCDs are effective in all walks of life. So practicing them and training them in different walks of life is, you know, another really important thing. How will I manage it when my workload is just completely at capacity? What PCDs can I deploy? What will it look like? Who can I use to make sure I'm actually displaying those behaviors when I've got all those big things on? But essentially, we've also got this idea of, okay, what PCDs are you going to deploy looking ahead over the next 18 months in your ambitions and goals towards representing Squad UK in Shanghai? What do you need to do? How are you going to do it? And how do you want that to be successful? So that is it from me today. Thanks so much for your participation. I'm really pleased that you guys were able to join us, and thank you everyone who's watching this after the fact. You can see our Grey Matters handle there, our website. So if you want to get in touch directly with any questions, then please do.